evening. This is Debra V. Wilson. It is Wednesday, the 14th of March, 2018. The time is 1800 hours and 21 minutes, and that's GMT minus 5. We went ahead an hour over the weekend, and I'm in Canada. This podcast is very short, but it is, for me, a very important podcast because it's looking at issues of identity and when identities intersect, what trumps which one is acceptable to the larger community that makes up a nation, and which ones render you marginalized or not fully, quote unquote, engaged in your citizenship by the larger participants who are also citizens of a nation. With that, I have on my blog, which is called Women's Security, Peace Building, Feminism, and I'm going to post the link to this blog post. I have a post called National Identity Intersects Religious Identity for some Israeli ultra-Orthodox youth and some British Muslim youth. In Israel, there have been discussions for a while, and there are discussions again around the lack of participation of Israeli ultra-Orthodox. Particularly, I'm looking at the young men. And in the UK, there are numerous discussions around British Muslims, and for some people, are they fully engaged in being British, or are they all consumed with their religious identity and how they define it? And again, I should go back and say that discussion is being had in Israel by some Israelis about the ultra-Orthodox. I don't want to make an assumption or say that it's everyone. So I think it's very important to recognize where there are differences, and then to understand how do we engage in our construct of how I construct and believe myself to be different from you, and how I assign meaning to my identity, which I think differs from yours, believe that it differs from yours, and you vice versa. I think that's important. But I also think it's important in our humanity to look from a macro perspective and understand the similarities within differences. So for me, when I look at the issues around the ultra-Orthodox youth who do not want to serve in the military because it's contrary to their religious belief system, it challenges their religious belief system in a way they don't want to be challenged, some of them. Then I look at British Muslims, the young, and some women who choose to cover, and what that means for them, and some men, young men who choose to grow beards, and their dress and the dress they choose to, type of dress they choose to engage in as an indication of embracing how they construct their identity. And then what the ways in which these religious minorities in Israel and the UK, how the construct of religious self, my religiosity, then pings against the larger group's construct of national identity. So I think the similarities for me are fascinating. The specific post that I'm going to include about the young British Muslims is from Birmingham, England, and it's specifically the dress. And it's very interesting. Again, the comparing and the contrasting is fascinating. There's a professor that speaks in this video, it's a YouTube video, about some British Muslim youth adopting attire that people connect with militarization, specifically with, for instance, ISIS, hyper-militarized identities that are indeed a threat to Britain. But for some British Muslim youth, it has nothing to do with extremism. It has to do with embracing cultural clothing that is familiar to them, and then then spinning that through their British identity. He talks about the clothing that some people associate with quote-unquote Muslims, and particularly extremist Muslims, and then it's the young person is wearing Doc Martens. And then I look at the ultra-Orthodox, and their style of dress marks them out, just as it does for some British Muslims. Style of dress marks you out. And so in the UK, you have some believing that Muslim attire equates with hyper-militarization that might be a threat to them, to the larger British population, and also it might for some mark out British Muslims as not being really British because you dress that way. Well, then you look at Israel, and then the attire of the ultra-Orthodox marks them out clearly, as I define as an ultra-Orthodox, and then for some that marks you out as your passivity, in that you won't participate in mandatory service to the military service to the nation because you're this ultra-Orthodox. And so there's meaning assigned to their clothing and what they look like. And so for some, the ultra-Orthodox are also a threat. And their clothing signals that threat, but in a different way. And for British Muslims, it can signal a hyper-militarization that might be turn on us. And it also signals for some people you're not really engaged in your Britishness. The way in which you define your Britishness is not quote-unquote right. And then in Israel you're not fully engaged in being an Israeli Jew. The way you define your Jewishness could potentially be a threat to us because you won't serve. So on one hand, you have this hyper-militarized identity being projected onto some British Muslim youth, and then you have in Israel this hyper passivity that's being projected onto some ultra-Orthodox male youth. And that projection can be quantified and identified by clothing, attire. Just 2 YouTube videos, they're very short. And in addition, the one about the British Muslims, you don't even need to watch the whole video. You should. It's an excellent series that's coming out of Ireland about radicalization and meaning and identity. Fabulous series. I'll post that as well. In any case, I found the way in which, I always find the ways in which humanity experiences, we experience our humanity, and in the difference, we are often more similar than we ever realize or want to think about. Because sometimes, for some reason, we seem to take comfort in identifying people as the other. I maintain that we're more alike than not. And this is a perfect example, in my opinion. This is Debra V. Wilson. I'm in Canada, and it's Wednesday, the 14th of March, 2018. Thank you.